Those are showing up for everybody?
Yes, I believe.
Yes, okay. So as Martin mentioned, my name is John Edwards. I've been an English teacher for about 20 years. Originally, as a lot of people do, I came over to Korea for a short time. Originally, it was going to be 1 year, but then I discovered I really like teaching languages, and also I met my wife, so my plans sort of changed. And 20 years later, I'm still involved in ELT. About 12 years ago, I got involved in materials development, and I've been working in that field with Compass Publishing as an editor and project manager. And that's been a very interesting experience because it allows me to travel around the world and meet all kinds of teachers, and get to see how ELT can be taught differently in different countries. So that's been very interesting. Anyway, my presentation today is going to be about getting your students speaking. So I know this can be a rather challenging thing to do at the best of times. Getting shy students talking, or balancing the room so that your shy students and outgoing students share speaking time. But even now, as we enter this, as we've been in this very difficult environment with COVID-19 and teaching online, it's become even more difficult. So hopefully some of the strategies that we talk about today will help you to improve the amount of speaking that your students are doing in your online classes as well. So just a little bit about our agenda for today. I wanted to talk about learner needs first, like what are we teaching our students? And then the role of the teacher in speaking classes, the different types of tasks that we can give our students, and the importance of variety in assigning speaking tasks or designing a curriculum for our students. A little bit about error correction, and then we'll do some talk a little bit about troubleshooting when we're having difficulty with a speaking activity and it's not going well. So some strategies for improving the amount of speaking that students are able to do. During the presentation, I did want to ask some questions to the audience as well. So hopefully some of you are not too shy and you want to participate. If not, it's okay. There's no pressure. But I'll be asking you some questions during the presentation, and if you want to share your ideas, you can either do that by unmuting your mic, or you can send a chat message as well. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was student needs. So, in order to do that, we need to sort of project into the future and think about how will our students be using English. Maybe can I get some ideas from the audience? How will students be using English in their lives in the future? Or if nobody has anything to say, I have some ideas as well.
To write graduation theses.
Writing graduation theses. How can I view the chat? Let me see.
Usually at the top of your screen, you should see the Zoom items, screen share, and
right.
at the top of the screen, does it say you're currently sharing your screen, and then you can see the chat. And if you click on the chat button, yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, if there's no ideas from the audience, that's okay. I have some ideas. So first of all, when students are in their own home country, of course, sometimes they'll be rarely encountering English speakers. Like, yeah, Jack says travel. Definitely, that's one important thing. If they're going to be traveling, in English-speaking environments, or in fact living in English-speaking environments, they're going to have a whole bunch of everyday situations that they're going to have to handle, like asking directions, you know, these kinds of things, asking for things in shops, asking prices. So we have to, I think most courses, most materials prepare students for this kind of thing if they deal with functions, language functions. But we also have to think a lot of our students are going to be entering learning environments, like going to university in English-speaking environments, or doing exchange years, this kind of thing. So there's particular situations that they're going to be in that we need to prepare them for, and there's certain vocabulary that they need to be aware of that's specifically related to being in a learning environment, English-speaking learning environment. Things like registering for classes, paying your fees, you know, participating in seminars. So there's a lot of language that we need to teach them related to that. And the last one, of course, is related to being in the workplace, either, you know, white-collar jobs or so-called blue-collar jobs. A lot of our students will, I don't know what it's like in Japan, but in Korea, even some small and medium-sized companies have to do business a lot with English-speaking countries, or also with non-native speaking countries, but they're using English as a lingua franca. So that creates some new challenges as well, because not only do we have to teach students the forms and the expressions that are related to business English, which is or ESP in some cases, but we also have to help them develop strategies so they can negotiate meaning with other non-native speakers. And we have to get them familiar with a lot of things like um, difficult accents that are difficult to deal with. Sometimes students may have difficulty understanding who they're talking with, and they need some kind of strategies to be able to work out communication effectively. So as we can see, you know, in all of these situations, speaking is going to be very essential. I don't think anybody would argue with that. In fact, commonly when we say, can you speak English, what we mean is, can you, you know, that sort of indicates how central speaking is as a skill to language development or to language fluency. We're not saying, can you write English or can you read English? We're saying, can you speak English? That's kind of the way we commonly ask about their fluency level. So how can we prepare our students for all of these challenges as teachers? This is sort of what I want to talk about in this presentation. Unfortunately, if Japan, the ELT market in Japan is anything like I've experienced in Korea, a lot of ELT beyond, let's say, the middle school level focuses on other skills, especially reading and grammar, vocabulary building, and definitely focuses on somebody mentioned entrance exams. And so test taking is like, it sort of eclipses the importance of speaking. Unfortunately, a lot of teachers sort of struggle with this, you know. And also another challenge that we've had more recently is the fact that we're teaching online. Some teachers are really struggling to adapt what they've learned, or what they've the methods that they've learned and they've perfected over the years. They're struggling to now adapt those to an online environment. You know, things that they were doing in the classroom don't really work well in an online environment. So I wanted to ask the audience about this as well. What are some of the challenges that you're finding with running, specifically related to speaking, with running classes online? Are there any things that you're finding especially difficult? You can add some text in the chat, or you can unmute your mic and throw in some comments if you want. Students don't want to turn their mics on. Yeah, right. Simultaneous conversations. Maybe Henry said simultaneous conversations, meaning it's hard to kind of do turn taking. Is that what you mean, Henry? Or another thing is, if you're not comfortable doing breakout rooms, getting students to do pair work or small group work can be very challenging as well. So these, this is just adding to our challenges. So, in the language classroom, we have all kinds of things at our disposal. We can do pair work, we can do presentations, we can do small group work, we can do mingling activities. And that's the real challenge that we have nowadays is can online speaking practice really replace the richness of the language environment, the language classroom environment? So let's turn our attention to the content of teaching speaking. So what can we provide as teachers? Well, first of all, we can provide instruction in structures, vocabulary, functional expressions, like we talked a little bit about when we were talking about student needs. We can teach them strategies for how to negotiate meaning or how to express themselves if they don't know the exact vocabulary. We can teach them the conventions of certain speaking situations, like giving presentations and this kind of thing. So we have some content that we can give in the form of instruction, but more importantly, especially for speaking, we need to give them lots of opportunities for practice. So we need to provide a variety of situations that are going to be, in some cases, personal and authentic, and also as realistic as we can make them within the language classroom. And we need to build their fluency. We need to build automaticity and their kind of naturalness of speaking, so that they're not sort of thinking too much and planning out their answers, planning what they want to say. They're speaking naturally, and the language is flowing as it does for native speakers. And we also have to give them, based on that practice, we also have to give them useful feedback. But a lot of teachers spend too much time on instruction. They spend, too much of class time on instruction, and they steal the spotlight. They take away the time from their students that their students could be using to practice the language. So the problem with even if they're sort of leading discussions or leading conversations, the problems with teacher-initiated speaking are that it, of course, limits student speaking time, and it's likely to follow a kind of predictable pattern where the teacher asks a question, the student responds, and then maybe the teacher gives some feedback about that response. So it's a very kind of artificial mode of communication, and it robs or limits the opportunities for students to practice many other skills, like, for example, asking their own questions or keeping the ball rolling or asking for clarification, these kinds of things. When students are speaking in pairs as equals, then they have opportunities to practice those skills. So it's very important for teachers to, I think a lot of speaking teachers are uncomfortable, especially younger teachers. They're uncomfortable yielding control of the classroom, but it's important to do that, to give students opportunities to develop those skills and to become more independent communicators. So we need to, because we're teaching both, we have instruction that we're teaching content, but we're also providing opportunities for practice. We have to have these two instructional approaches. We have to have a teacher-centered approach for when we are giving some instruction. So this is where we're doing just direct instruction, and the teacher is the authority, the formal authority or the expert on the subject, or providing some kind of model. And then we have to also have a student-centered approach where we're allowing students to do more inquiry-based learning or cooperative learning, and we become the more like the facilitator or the delegator of roles. the person who sort of gets the activity going and runs the activity, rather than the person who's leading the activity. So as a facilitator, you know, the sub skills that we have to practice, or the roles that we have to practice in this as a facilitator of learning, are that we're creating interesting, manageable tasks that build skills so that they have a purpose. They're building the skills that we want to build or that we're focusing on. We have to provide a safe and supportive environment and the necessary tools that they need, the linguistic tools that they need to accomplish the tasks that we're giving them. We have to give them the right kind of support and the right level of support at the right time. So what we mean in this case is scaffolding, right? We have to give them sufficient scaffolding, and we also have to know when to take that away. And we also have to give guidance or constructive feedback at the right time. So let's turn our attention to the kinds of tasks that we are using in the language classroom. So we have three basic types. We can divide them into three basic types. So we have controlled or drill practice, where the structures are very the structures that the students are using are very limited or prescribed, and the students are performing very kind of mechanical repetition, like substitution drills, this kind of thing. And the communication is not the focus. So we're not, the point is not about meaning focused output. It's about just drilling the structure and getting it to be familiar or ingrained in their brains. Then we have language focused practice, which takes where communication might be part of what they're doing, but it's still very structured. It's still about practicing a particular structure. But then communicative tasks are where we are focusing on conveying information, where meaning focused output and input is the main focus, and we want to try to make those as realistic as possible. And specific structures or vocabulary aren't prescribed. They can use any of the tools in their toolbox to get the point across. So we have this kind of the spectrum of different kinds of tasks that we can use in the language classroom. So when we're using controlled practice, the more sort of limited or drill-like repetition, that usually follows some kind of dialogue or text. And it's usually done in pairs, so they're practicing question and response or dialogue pairs. And it's very drill-like and repetitive. So they're doing some kind of substitutions of keywords in the content words in the structure, but they're focusing only on that one structure. So there's less risk of errors there. And this is where we want to really focus our attention on them getting the structure right, you know. Otherwise, they can develop kind of fossilization of the error. So it gives students a kind of safe environment in which to try out language patterns. They're not given all of the complexity of communicate that they normally would encounter in communicative tasks. So they listen to a model, and then they repeat the model after the listening, and then they practice it in pairs. And usually that's followed up by some kind of presentation where the teacher calls on pairs to present some of what they've been working on. So in one of our products called Time to Talk, which is focusing on 21st century communication skills, you can see this kind of communicative, this kind of drill practice. So the students are given some opportunity to prepare. So in this case, they're filling out prompts to make polite requests, and then this is kind of given to them as a way to get ready, a preparation phase, so that it allows them to plan out their questions and their answers and speak confidently. And then you can get them to practice it as a pair. And there's lots of scaffolding provided as well in terms of examples, and the structures are taught beforehand and vocabulary is taught beforehand as well. So this allows them to practice it, and then you can get them to do presentation as a follow-up activity to give them a little bit more repetition and consolidation. But of course, like this kind of controlled drill practice is not enough. Students also need to use the language more freely and get used to being in more realistic communication situations for communication. They also need to be able to personalize the language with talking about their own experiences, their own ideas, and make a connection with the language, because that's where they're going to really learn and develop fluency. They also need to develop communication skills. So like we talked about before, when students are equals in the communication task, then they're actually practicing those kinds of skills like negotiating meaning or asking for clarification. So it better simulates real life contexts that they will actually encounter later in their life. So communicative tasks usually follow this kind of process where we have a lead in. We kind of talk about the situation that they're going to be in. And part of the purpose of that is to activate their schema, what they already know about those kinds of situations, and maybe refresh their background knowledge about some of the language that they already know that they can use in that situation. Then we typically give them some kind of input, could be a video or an audio or reading or something like that, and we focus on some key language point. And then there's usually a guided planning section or phase in the process. Then we go into the activity, the actual activity, and we give them feedback. And we may want to also repeat that cycle again, allowing them to repeat the activity, for example, with another partner or another group. So it's important, one thing I see a lot with a lot of younger, inexperienced teachers is they do the same kind of tasks over and over again. They're kind of a one-trick pony. They get familiar with leading one kind of task and they sort of stick to it. But the problem with that is that limited variety means that students are only learning certain kinds of communication, or they're only gaining confidence in certain kinds of situations. So the more variety we can give to our students in terms of the tasks that we give them, the more flexibility they're likely to develop in terms of their communication skills. So we can vary the kinds of tasks, tasks that we give them in terms of the genre or the format. We're going to talk about some examples. We can also vary the topics that they're focusing on. Also, the kinds of audiences, whether it's a small group, a single person, or the whole class, or even outside of the classroom, we can have them do things like video chatting and things like this as well. And also the aims of communication. So we can vary these four dimensions of the task. So it's important to keep in mind when we're thinking of the genres, we can break them down into two categories where we have either interaction, where we have two people interacting, both that we have different participants that are interacting, or we have like production as well, productive genres. So interactional genres are things like conversations or informal discussions, meetings, formal discussions, more formal discussions or meetings, a goal-oriented cooperation where they're, for example, trying to solve a problem together or plan something together. Obtaining goods and services. So this would be typically like buying something in a store. Information exchange or interviewing somebody. Then production would be more like one-way communication, like describing an experience or telling a story, putting a case, for example, in a debate, making announcements or like broadcasting, like in a podcast, for example, or giving instructions to a person or to a group, or addressing an audience and giving a speech. So we need to kind of balance those two types of genres in our speaking classrooms and make sure that students are experiencing both interactive and productive genres of speaking tasks. So just some of the formats that you could explore as a teacher. You could have things like presentations. I think many of these lend themselves to the online environment as well. So for example, giving presentations, you could have a student prepare something to talk about and present, take the floor in the online chat room and talk about their experience. You could have one-on-one interviews in breakout rooms. You could have small group discussions or whole class discussions. You could do things with pair work and teamwork. You can do role play. I'm not a big fan of role play, but sometimes for certain tasks, it's important. Or you could actually have, with higher level students, you could have formal debates. So there's lots of things that we can have in our toolbox as teachers to give students lots of variety. And that can make learning more interesting, but it also has the added benefit that it makes them more well-rounded communicators. But we have this problem that some teachers avoid group or pair activities. And why is that? Especially in the bricks and mortar school, when we were teaching in bricks and mortar schools, in real life, a lot of teachers avoid group and pair work activity. Maybe I'll ask the audience to give their ideas about this as well. Why do some teachers avoid doing pair work and group work, small group work? Any ideas? Difficult to monitor, loss of control. One student can dominate. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's difficult to balance. I love pair work because I give control to the students, right? Yeah, that's very encouraging. If some teachers really like to do pair work, that's excellent. They really need that, actually. Let's talk about some of the reasons. So some people mentioned some of these already. Some teachers might have a perception or a bias, especially younger teachers. They might think, well, I'm the teacher, I'm supposed to be leading the class. It's my job to be up at the front of the class. They have this kind of perception of the teacher and the role of the teacher, and that may bias them. Also, a lot of older students, they may expect the teacher to be doing most of the talking. They see you as the kind of the authority, and they think, if we're always doing pair work or group work, why does the teacher need to be here? They may have this kind of perception. Also, a lot of teachers are worried about error fossilization. So they worry that if students are sort of off by themselves and the teacher isn't listening, then they're going to be making these errors, and those errors are going to become bad habits. Also, as one of our audience members mentioned, yeah, they're difficult to control, especially online. You can't be in all of the breakout rooms at all of the times. And in the real world, they're also very, very noisy, right? Your people in the neighboring classrooms may complain about that if you're doing pair work and it gets sort of out of hand. And the last point that I wanted to make is they're difficult to assess. So, how can you judge whether the students were doing what they were supposed to be doing and they did a good job? You can't really assess them. You can't kind of monitor their learning very easily in group work or pair work. So just I know this is not realistic, but a lot of teachers feel like this when they do pair work or group work. but they worry about losing control of the classroom, or maintaining order becomes kind of more challenging as soon as you shift the spotlight away from yourself. So how can you do pair work and group work effectively? Well, one way is to group students strategically. So one of our participants, audience members, mentioned, having one student dominate. Well, this is your part of your role as a teacher to pair up the students. If you have one very strong student paired with a weak student, there's going to be frustration there, or that one student is going to dominate. So it's important to group students so that their skill level is more or less matched equally. Also, keep the groups small. I think 4 or fewer is ideal if you can manage it. Another point is to give a clear procedure and roles to each of your students in the group. So maybe you could have somebody who's the chairperson. You can teach them what is a chairperson in a meeting. And you can have one person who's the note taker, one person who is doing the brainstorming, or leading the brainstorming or asking the questions. So you can give, depending on the type of task that you're assigning them, you can give them each different roles. Also setting in your procedure, setting a time limit and a goal for each step. So there should be some kind of clear time limit. So you're saying, for example, okay, in step 1, I want you to do this, and at the end of 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you to show me this thing. That sort of keeps them on track and keeps them, they know there's some kind of accountability involved. Also, a lot of pair work fails because the students just don't have the language skills. So being able to provide scaffolding, that could be something like giving them a handout to refer to for certain language structures, or writing something up on the whiteboard that they can refer to. That can help especially the weaker students to manage the task well. Using breakout rooms online effectively, if you get them to go into the breakout rooms and then you sort of visit them every few minutes, you sort of switch between the rooms. That can, if they don't know that you're coming, that can kind of keep them on track. And of course, circulating around the rooms and supporting is going to be very key. A lot of teachers make that mistake. But that shouldn't be your role as a teacher. You should be kind of circulating to the different teams and participating with them. Here's an example of what your board might look like during a pair work activity. So you could have the procedure at the top of your board. So make a little chart showing each of the 3 steps. And you can say, for example, they're in step 1, they're going to be doing it by themselves. And the point here is to write 3 interview questions, and I'm giving you 5 minutes to do it. So there's a clear outcome that you're expecting from them. So they're expected to have 3 questions, and you're giving them a clear limit as well, time limit. And for example, in the second step, they could be doing it in pairs, and they're going to ask and answer their interview questions and fill in the handout that you give them. And then step 3 is going to be 1 by 1 in the classroom. In the whole class, they're going to be presenting their partner's answers to the class. And then in the bottom part of your whiteboard, you could have the scaffolding. So you can give them some sentence starters or sentence frames and some examples that they could use, and then also sample responses. So that's going to help your lower level students. And you could provide this if you're teaching in a real world class. You can write it on the whiteboard, or you can provide it on a Google Doc, for example, to have them refer to it. In Time to Talk, the product that we mentioned before, they've got lots of these kinds of communicative activities. So they have also this kind of structure of preparation, pair work, and presentation. and there's scaffolding provided in the form of examples and structures and vocabulary that they're taught ahead of time. And there's a preparation phase, so they can speak confidently. They can prepare their language ahead of time and then speak confidently to each other. And then you can have them do, there's always a presentation part as well. So let's just shift very quickly to talk about error correction. I think a lot of teachers and a lot of students feel like error correction is like this, it's sort of like you've made a mistake, and they have a very negative connotation about error correction. But I think that really only applies to the extreme. If there's sort of two extremes that I've seen in a lot of classrooms. There's this sort of laissez-faire approach where teachers don't do any error correction. But the problem there is that it leads to error fossilization. The students are just making the same errors over and over again. It's never corrected, and then it becomes a habit, and that's very hard to undo. Any experienced language teacher will let you know about that. And the other extreme is the overzealous approach, where the teacher's sort of correcting every error that they hear, and that can lead to student inhibition. So the students are going to be too scared to talk. They're going to worry about making a mistake and being embarrassed in front of the class. Also, it sort of interrupts the flow of communication if you're correcting every error. So we have to know we have to get the right kind of balance in terms of our error correction, and we have to know when to do error correction as well. So here's some tips for giving feedback or correcting errors. One thing to think about is when we're giving feedback, it's not only about error correction, it's also about what they did right. So when we give feedback, we can mention, oh, I thought you guys were speaking very fluently, and you mentioned some really interesting expressions, but I heard this little mistake that you made, and maybe you want to focus on that. Avoid interrupting the flow of communication. So I think the key here is if they're talking and they're communicating and there's no, they can understand each other, especially during a communicative task, don't jump in and correct errors at that point. You might want to take notes and do an error correction session after the activity has wrapped up. Also avoid, singling out students in front of the group. That's going to make them feel very, very self-conscious and intimidated or inhibited when they're in future classes. So a better way to do it is, you could say, instead of mentioning names, you can just say, I heard this mistake, or I noticed somebody was saying this, and mark it on the board. Also, you want to make sure to align feedback with pedagogical goals. This is especially important when you've taught some structure and you've gone through drill practice, and then you move on to communicative task, and then they've made the same mistake with that particular structure. You want to focus on that as well. So one kind of rule of thumb to follow is, if the pedagogical goal is accuracy, like in the kinds of drills that we were talking about before, where they're doing drill practice and very restricted use type activities, then you should do more correction, especially focusing on those key structures. But if the pedagogical goal is fluency, and you want to get them communicating, and the focus is more on communication, don't interrupt that communication with error correction. So you should do much less error correction, especially focusing on when in situations where the error interferes with communication, when there's a breakdown in communication. So what if you have a speaking activity and there's very little talking? What could be some of the problems there? Maybe I can open it up to the room again, the audience. If they're not speaking a lot, what could be some of the problems? Any ideas? Unclear goals, right. They don't know what to do. Not enough language. Yeah, maybe they don't have the language skills to do the task that you've given them. The task could be too difficult or unclear, as people mentioned. Yeah, definitely. All good ideas. So here's some ideas that I came up with as well. It could be just an uninteresting task or topic. It could be something that they don't connect to, so they don't really have anything to say about it. If you have a group of teenagers and you want to talk about, the stock market or the economy or something like that, they can't relate to it. They're not going to talk about it. So they don't have anything to say about that particular topic. As we mentioned just now, it could be too challenging. They just don't have the language skills to do the task that you're giving them, or it could be too simple. They they finish it very quickly, or it's very easy and boring for them, and they don't see the point of it. So you're not going to get a lot of communication happening. You could have students that are very shy. A group, I'm sure some of you have experienced this before, especially if you teach high school. Very shy students, scared of making mistakes. Too much teacher talk can also be a problem. If you talk a lot and you're obviously taking time away from their talking. And as we mentioned before, some students could dominate the conversation. So just some things to keep in mind. A lot of these points are things that are sort of the takeaways from the presentation. So obviously we want to create a safe environment for students to make them feel comfortable and lower that affective barrier. Very low pressure situation, especially for communicative tasks. We want to keep things light and fun and interesting. It doesn't have to be like a game or something like that, but it needs to be something where they feel engaged and they feel they want to participate. I'm sure a lot of you have had that sort of magic moment in class where it almost feels like people forget that they can't speak English well, and they're so interested in communicating or participating that the magic happens. Also having a positive view of errors, like thinking of errors as an opportunity to learn something, and using some of the strategies that we talked about with error correction just a couple of minutes ago. Doing an error correction session after an activity, not mentioning people by name. This can create a safe environment for students to be more willing to participate. Also choosing engaging topics that are real, especially ones that are relevant to the lives of your students. I think this is where a lot of teachers need to listen more and ask questions more to their students and find out what they're really interested in. If you have a bunch of students that are interested in a particular movie or particular show, type of music, that's going to get them talking. That's going to get them sharing with each other. Like we talked about before, strategic pairing. Avoid pairing strong students with weak students or shy students with chatty students. You should put people who are more or less similar in terms of their language abilities and also their personalities. You should put them together. Allow students preparation time. So like we talked about with the kind of the flow of language tasks, the speaking tasks. We have a lead in to kind of get them warmed up. We have some input to give them some of the language skills that they need. And then we need to give them some planning time to make it familiar enough the language needs to be sort of prepared a little bit so that they can participate. Scaffolding is very important in terms of getting students involved. So especially for low-level students, they need you to pre-teach the language and to provide some language support. Of course, stronger students won't need this. And as a teacher, you need to know when to kind of pull back the scaffolding as well and let them be more independent. Otherwise, they become too reliant on the scaffolding. And of course, giving students the spotlight and minimizing teacher talk is going to get them talking more. So that's the end of my presentation, but I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about this this product that I mentioned a few times. So Time to Talk is a 7-level communication focused ELT coursebook for university and adult students. And each of the 7 levels has 20 lessons, and each unit has learning aims that are based on the CEFR competencies. So it teaches all 4 skills, but there's a heavy focus on speaking and listening especially. And communicative activities are balanced with grammar and vocabulary instruction. So it's not a pure communicative language teaching book. It also has language support built in, which is something I really like. And the range of levels. So level 1 starts with pre-A1 level, and it goes all the way up to B2 level, so quite high level. One nice thing also is that we have this series on our teaching platform, which is called ClassBox. So what that means is you have a full library of digital textbooks that you can use through a browser, and you can use that to teach your classes online. All you have to do is screen sharing. So each of the books has some tools for markup, and it has all the answers embedded and the audio embedded. And on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see there are some buttons for downloads and listen to the MP3 files. So downloads provides you with a list of all the tests and the worksheets that go along with this book as well. Along the top of the screen, there's all the little tools that you would need, like tools for searching for certain vocabulary within the text, leaving notes, doing markup on the screen. You can also embed links if you wanted to add a video in the book that you want to show the students. So all that stuff stays persistently on the page. So whenever you log in again and go to that page, all the notes and the links will all be there. So it's a very nice tool for teaching online. So I wanted to thank you for your attention, and if there are any questions, I'll take some questions. Any questions from the audience? You can just unmute your mic, or you can write your questions in the chat room. I guess not.
No, well, thank you very much, John, for your presentation. And
you're very welcome.
I'd like to, if there are no questions, I'd like to ask everyone to turn your mics on, and let's give a round of applause and appreciation to John and his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Thanks a lot for your presentation.
Thank you.
Hey, John, there's a question from teacher.
I did see that. Yeah, there's one question. So it says, which types do you usually implement, group or pair? One thing I mentioned during my presentation is that variety is very important. So I think in the classroom, having a wide variety of different tasks, sometimes you want to have students speaking individually, giving a presentation. Sometimes you want to have pair work or small group work. Sometimes you want to have 2 teams that are having a formal debate. Having variety is the key here. Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for your attention, and I hope you have a great day and stay safe.
Thank you again, John. And one more round of applause. You mentioned that you would be in the Hangouts if people want to contact you again later, or
Right. If you want to stop by and have a chat about any of the ideas we talked about, I'll be with the Tryalogue team for about half an hour, so you can join us there. Noriko-san has put the link information in the chat room, so you can visit us there just immediately right after the presentation now, and I'll be there for about half an hour if you want to talk less in a less intense situation.
Okay, well, thank you to Tryalogue Education as well for sponsoring the presentation. And I'd also encourage people to visit the educational materials exhibit and some of the other activities and discussion rooms. There's SIGs and topic discussion rooms that you can find on the Eventzilla page under the live sessions button. And thanks again.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Martin.
Have a good day.
You too.
Thank you, Martin.
No,
Thank you very
thank you.
much for supporting us. Bye bye.
No, okay, thanks. Goodbye.